All right, you guys. Well, thank you guys, everybody, for hopping on today. I know everybody's schedules, especially on Friday, gets super crazy and busy, and this is actually a take two for us. We had some issues with internet the first time Dianna was speaking on Brainspotting, so this is a do-over, and I'm so excited to be able to present this to you guys. I know we had a lot of people looking forward to jumping back on. So first, you guys, my name is Laura Martinez. I'm your outreach manager for AspenRidge Recovery, and I also cover the Southern Territory. I'm gonna go ahead when Dianna starts talking, I'm gonna put my contact information in the chat, so you can certainly feel free to get a hold of me for the recording. I'm gonna be sending out the recording so that everybody has a copy of that and can share with your office if you need. So you can certainly get a hold of me that way. But anybody that's registered for this event, I'm also gonna just go ahead and send out that recording so that nobody misses out, in case you weren't able to jump on but did register for the event. But otherwise, I do see some familiar faces here, so it's great to see everybody. If you are not familiar with AspenRidge Recovery, we are a dual diagnosis treatment program. We cover we cover 4 locations in Fort Collins, Lone Tree, Lakewood, and Colorado Springs. In AspenRidge Recovery, we specialize in substance abuse, mental health, and complex trauma in adults 18 and over. For our highest level of care, we have an in-house 90-day transitional program, and that program's run out of our Lakewood and our Fort Collins Center. We also have a 12-week in-person and virtual IOP program, and that's going to be at all 4 of our locations. So I also wanted to introduce tonight, you guys, Miss Dianna Sandoval. And Dianna is the Executive Clinical Director of AspenRidge Recovery and has more than 30 years of experience in the behavioral health field. She focuses on addiction treatment and has designed and implemented and managed multiple recovery programs in the state of Colorado as well as Maryland. In addition to developing clinical programs and providing direct clinical services, Dianna is a leader in providing clinical supervision, team building, and establishing healthy organizational cultures in the behavioral health industry. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dianna Sandoval.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I really appreciate you taking time out of your Friday to spend an hour or so, 40 minutes to an hour with me to learn about brain spotting. It's a topic that I really enjoy speaking about. It's a wonderful technique. And for those of you that were here for the last session, welcome back. Sorry for the debacle. I think we're in good shape now with our Wi-Fi, and those of you that are joining for the first time, it's great to have you. So I'll jump right in, and I don't mind if this is interactive, so if you have questions as I go along, that's fine, but just so you know, I did save some time at the end for question, answers, and comments. So let's jump in. I really hope to inspire you to be curious about brain spotting and to become interested in what it is and how it works, and maybe add it to your own clinical toolbox. It's a wonderful technique. So brain spotting and is a brain-based therapy, and I'm going to talk today a little bit about brain-based therapy versus talk therapy, and not versus in opposition, but in difference. Both hold equal value, and I think the best recipe is to use them in a combined order. And that's one of the things that I love about brain spotting, is that it really is not intended to be the only technique that a clinician uses. It's intended to be one technique that a clinician uses integratively with many others, and I really love that about it. It's designed to fit into your repertoire of skills. So brain spotting is a brain-based therapy. It really goes beyond the mind to the brain. In 2003, Dr. David Grand discovered brain spotting, and he was actually he was doing EMDR, had been doing that for many years. and was working with an ice skater who he had done what he thought some very deep work and had done some trauma resolution through EMDR. And this particular skater was trying to do this move or technique in her routine, and every time she would get to this one technique, she would freeze and was unable to do it. So she came in for a session and was talking to him about it, and he noticed in the session that when she started talking about this particular technique, she would lock her vision in one spot and her eyes begin to vibrate just a little bit. And he was paying attention and caught on to that, and then begin to focus on what's happening there. And thank goodness he's an exploratory therapist, and he went with it and wanted to try and figure out what was happening. Then he shared that with some of his colleagues and said, hey, I had this experience, and why don't you guys try this and see if it happens for you in your sessions, and let's see if there's anything to this. So a few of his therapeutic colleagues did that, and they had the same results. And so it was then that he knew he was onto something. And from that point, began to be very intentional and begin to do research on the brain and the structure of the brain, and begin to formulate what we now know as brain spotting. So that's how it was born. And in the past 10 to 20 years, brain-based therapy has really been on the rise. I, for one, love it. I think that this muscle in our melon called the brain is a fabulous, intriguing thing. And I don't know that we're ever really going to know enough about it, but everything that we learn is monumental in us as clinicians being able to do the best possible work with our clients that we can do. One of the things that I truly believe as a clinician is that we do neurological surgery and we do heart surgery. We just don't knock our clients out and open them up. But the depth of the work and the value of the work, in my mind, is parallel in many ways. We take people into some really tender, deep, and sacred spaces. So I think brain spotting fits into that and is a really soft but powerful way to get there. So the idea that we're either moving between brain-based therapy and talk therapy is really interesting to me, because sometimes we forget that there's all these different modalities and techniques, but typically they fall under a talk therapy modality of treatment. And most talk therapy takes a long time to develop connection. It's diverse and it's well developed, but it can take a long time to get to those deep-rooted places, where in brain spotting you can get there pretty quick, which is a really nice tool. So let's just talk a little bit about talk therapy. Again, I'm a super fan of talk therapy. If there's anyone on this webinar who knows me personally or professionally, you'll know that I am a talker, and I just really love talk therapy. I think it's a wonderful way to process and explore and exchange. And so I want to kind of highlight the value and some specifics about talk therapy, and then in comparison or contrast, highlight the brain spotting or brain-based therapy. So talk therapy dates all the way back to our buddy Sigmund Freud in psychoanalysis, and he termed it as the talking cure. So we definitely see results in talk therapy. There's no question about that. It's a powerful mode of treatment. It relies deeply on the level of relational attunement, which is a parallel to brain spotting. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But talk therapy really allows us to create that safe space and connection and appropriate professional relationship with our clients. And that's powerful. I mean, we know, research has told us for a long time that the relationship between the client and the therapist is impactful to the outcome. And that matters. So we want to be able to connect. Therapists have to be aware of the clients and also of the relationship dynamic between themselves and the client. And this is a place where it's really interesting that we don't often think about unless the client raises the issue, that this is a place where transference and countertransference can happen. And while we're building that therapeutic relationship and creating the attunement, we're also creating a mirror reflection of the client's primary caretaker as a child. And most oftentimes that's the mother. Not always, but most oftentimes it is. And so we do in talk therapy always have either a covert or overt dynamic of transference or potentially countertransference happening. That doesn't happen in brain spotting, and I'll explain why in the next slide. But talk therapy can take years, again, to build that connection and get to those core issues. And sometimes if we have those transference or countertransference issues rise up, it diverts from the core issue work, and we have to do some resolution with those other issues that insert themselves in the process, and then work our way back to the core issues. And so it just is a little bit longer process in many cases. Now, brain-based therapy. And in particular, brain spotting. EMDR is also a brain-based therapy. So I'll do some comparisons to that and brain spotting in just a moment. But for this particular slide, I want to talk about brain spotting and how that works as a brain-based therapy. It's a very focused therapy model, which is interesting because you're connecting with one particular spot that the client has identified as a brain spot. So it's very focused, although brain spotting allows for a lot of movement within that spot. It's centered in a process, again, called dual attunement. Part of that is the relationship between the client and the therapist, which is important and parallel to talk therapy. But the other part of it is the client and the clinician being aware of the brain-body process, which is tapping into that central nervous system. And that's the dual attunement. Client-therapist connection, client-therapist awareness of the central nervous system and the brain-body process. The motto for brain spotting is where you look affects how you feel. And this happens all the time. If you think back about an experience that you had or that you've witnessed someone having, when they're having a tough conversation, it either gets sad or it gets angry or there's a point of disagreement, a person will look away. So if you are in a dialogue and you have an emotional response, if you look to the left, you will have a different response to that same circumstance than if you look to the right. And also if you look center and you look straight on. So that's part of brain spotting is really using the field of vision to connect with a spot and direct how you feel. So it's very empowering for the client. And I love that about it. The client really leads the way on this technique. The eyes and the brain are intricately connected or woven together. This is really fascinating to me, and I'm going to tell you, I am still learning so much. The more I learn, the more I know I need to learn about brain spotting. But I read some information just a short while back about the retina is an embryonic extension of the brain, so it shares the same brain tissue, and that's why the eyes are such a quick connection from what we're seeing into the brain. And I just thought that was fascinating. I never knew that the eyes were so directly connected to brain space, but they are. And it's about 50% of the brain is devoted to visual response. So the eye-brain connection is powerful and really impactful when you're using a brain-based therapy. Brainspotting locates points in the visual field that helps to access unprocessed trauma and negative emotion. And that's really the core. It's the idea that if we identify where those brain spots are, and then we are down into the subcortical part of the brain, that's giving us access to trauma capsules that are stored there that talk therapy we can't get there in talk therapy. So it's like having a scanner, and the brain is constantly scanning what's going on in our environment. And when we do that, it sends these signals into the neocortex, which is the front part of the brain, and then into the mammal part of the brain, which is the limbic system, and then down into the human brain. So there's this scanner that's going on all the time looking for, am I in danger? What's going on around me? It really is a survival instinct. And then signals are sent from the eyes through the brain. It goes down into the amygdala, and the amygdala then is saying, oh, safety response, what should we do here? And that's how that process begins to work. The brain is organizing all of that data. And in brain spotting, we say that, again, it goes beyond the mind into the brain. So it goes beyond this conscious thought process into the limbic system, which is where the brain is storing trauma. And not just trauma, I think it's important to know that it's any negative emotion. And it certainly is a powerful technique for trauma, but it's not exclusive to trauma work. I had a client who was grinding her teeth and didn't know why. And so brain spotting helped figure that out. Never really identified why she was grinding her teeth, but stopped grinding them. And so it can be used for a lot of different things: depression, anxiety. Dr. Grand, the founder of it, he does a lot of work with like sports psychology and athletic teams, and also does work with people to help reduce anxiety around public speaking, around performing, singers, actors. So it can be used really almost on anybody. I also learned that it's effective with TBI. It's effective with dissociation. And so it really is a tool that you can use with almost anybody. So the brain spot, when we find that, that's called a relevant eye position. And that identifies and focuses on the trauma capsule that's deep down in that limbic system. So the relevant eye position is what we're looking for, or the brain spot. And the way that it works is, this is very cool. If you're a brain geek like I am, I love this because it just magnifies how complex our brains are. But if you look at the brain, and I like to use my hand, I hope people can see this, but this is a good analogy in that you have 3 layers that we're going through when we're doing brain spotting. And we start here in the stem, and this is the reptile brain. It's just pure survival, right? And then we go up here to the midbrain, and this is what's called the mammal brain, or the limbic system. And here, this is where emotions live and responses to threats. So your amygdala lives here in the limbic system. And then as you move up, you get up here into what's called the human brain, or the neocortex. This is called the subcortex. Here, you're in the human brain, which is where we do all our thinking. We come up with our brightest ideas. We're planning. This is where language lives, time, orientation, analysis. So this is the part of the brain that when a trauma hits, it first gets processed here, okay? And a trauma is really an unnatural event that happens that literally overwhelms your brain. Your brain's like, too much. This is too much, and I can't make sense of all of it. So this neocortex part of the brain begins to process rapidly whatever it can analyze, whatever it can process in thought and make sense of. What it can't make sense of, it fragments off into these little, well, I don't know how big they are, but in my mind they look like this or maybe like this, but they're capsules, and it literally drops down here into the mammal brain and it gets frozen. And in brain spotting, they're called trauma capsules, and that's where it lives. When it gets here, it creates this break between the brain and the body, because the muscles have memory, right? And so our brain and our body were not designed to hold trauma. That was never the intention. Not that we won't have traumatic events, but the intention was to keep the brain and the body, so that central nervous system, healthy and in motion so that the event could happen and then be released. And when the trauma is so big that it gets stuck and the brain isn't able to process all of it, it lands here and creates this division between brain and body. What we're doing in brain spotting is we're really honoring the natural design, the way that our brain and body were intended to work. We're just going in and creating space for that natural process to take over again. So in some ways, kind of removing those roadblocks or those barriers to the brain and the body being able to release the trauma. Oh, I'm very popular on email right now. Sorry about that, everybody. But that's how we're defining trauma, okay? And how brain spotting works to be able to help get in there and release that trauma. One of the things that I want to share with you is this was a revolution for me. In my mind, like, I tend to think in pictures. And so I think I shared this in the first training, but sometime back I had my phone out and I was going to take a picture of something. And so I, set my camera and I could see it out here externally. So you think of that as the brain scanning the environment. Well, somehow my thumb hit it or something and I flipped the camera. You flip it and turn it around, and I had no intention of taking a selfie, but there I was, as big as life on the screen. And in that moment, I thought, oh, snap, that's what happens in brain spotting. The brain is looking all the time outside, but when we do brain spotting, that scanner turns inward and goes looking for those trauma capsules. So that, for me, is just a nice visual picture about how brain spotting works, through the eyes, into the brain, down to the subcortex, and it's scanning for what's here that's not supposed to be here, what's a threat to me that needs to be released. So that's kind of a visual picture of how it works. Let's talk a little bit about technical therapy, which again is brain-based therapy, and some differences between EMDR and brain spotting. I am not trained in EMDR. I'm familiar with the technique, done a lot of reading on it, but I'm not trained in it. So this information is research-based, and then also colleague information exchange-based. And then also does come from Dr. David Grand himself, because he is trained in EMDR and used it for, like I said, many, many years until he discovered brain spotting. So here's what I know about that. When using a technical therapy, EMDR, and I had to write what that is because I forever forget what it stands for, there is a primary emphasis on the process and the technique. And the therapist sometimes can get a little lost in doing it right because, I don't know about you all, but whenever I'm working with a client, I want to do my best work. And when it comes to the trauma work, when it's a new technique, sometimes, like when I first started doing brain spotting, I thought, oh, what if I open something up? Or what if it gets out of control? Or what if it creates a secondary trauma? Or, you know, what if they have a come apart and I don't want to do any harm? I mean, we take an ethical oath as clinicians, like do no harm. And so that's always weighing in the back of my mind when working with clients. So you start getting into the brain work and that rises up. And that's one of the things that Dr. Grand has identified, that clinicians sometimes can get lost in the process and the technique when doing technical therapy or brain-based therapy. Also in EMDR, the therapist will guide the client through specifically defined steps to access the trauma. And it tends to be a specific trauma and a little bit more narrow pathway to stay focused on the identified trauma that they're working on with the therapist. In EMDR, it is highly effective, but again, it can draw a little bit from the relational attunement. And in brain spotting, the attunement is the foundation for what makes it function. And the secondary attunement is that central nervous system, like we're paying attention to the eyes and the body, but it's the relationship that the therapist has with the client to create a safe environment that allows the client to relax into the brain. And when they go into the brain is when they get into that subcortex. So it's a fixed eye position versus eye movement. And that's a significant difference. They're going to find a spot and we're going to stay focused and centered on that spot. Now they can look away during the process, but you'll find that they always come back to that spot. I've also had clients who they lock in to that spot and they don't budge. They stay there the entire time. So a client will potentially, their eyes might begin to move, typically not rapidly. I have had a client whose eyes kind of rolled up in their head a few times and then came down, but typically it's not that rapid kind of eye movement that you do in EMDR. We're going for fixed focal points in brain spotting. And then the brain spotting process is structured, but again, more open. And so if a client finds a spot and they pick, I'll go through here in a bit, like what the process for setting up a brain spotting session looks like, but they'll pick a topic and they might start on that topic and then they will divert to 3 or 4. I had a client, I don't know, a few weeks ago or so, went into 5 different places. And so it doesn't matter where they go, their brain is going to take them where they need to go. And that's really what we want. And the way that Dr. Grand describes it is that the client is like a comet and we're the tail of the comet. And so we just let them lead this entire process. And I will tell you that when I first started doing it, the most awkward part of it is because, again, I'm so devoted to talk therapy, very verbally driven, it was hard because you don't do that in brain spotting. The clients might speak, some do, and I've also had clients who don't say a word. And you go about 45 minutes, some can go 90 minutes, and they don't say a single word. And you just have to sit there through the whole session. Sometimes you can check in with them and say, you know, how are you doing? Or do you need to check in with your body? And I've had clients say, gee, when you asked me that, it kind of broke my focus. But the good news about it is they're able to get right back into focus of wherever that brain spot is. So if you're a practitioner and you do it, or you become a practitioner and you do it, it's all right. It doesn't derail the process. But I've learned for myself is that I don't ask. I just let them go. If they're speaking and they identify something, I'll affirm it. Like I'll say, oh, that's really a good point of awareness. Or I'll say, okay, you know, follow that. They'll say, oh, something's coming up for me. And I'll say, okay, follow that. Go where it takes you. It's okay. And so I'll do a little bit of affirmation and a tiny bit of permission giving to follow the direction that their brain is going. But I don't talk to them like I'm talking to you right now. I'm quiet and they take me wherever they need to go. So Sandy Hook school shooting, just a traumatic event for everyone, really. But in December of 2012, when there were a group of researchers thought that event is life-changing for so many people. And it created this plethora or this domino of PTSD survivors. And so a community-based research group did an assessment, and they conducted an effectiveness of therapeutic models on survivors of PTSD, in particular that event. And they wanted to see, like, really what are the best techniques for addressing trauma or PTSD. And Brainspotting came out as the #1 technique. And I think it was like 59.09% success rate, but they really tested everything. They tested brain spotting, they tested EMDR, they did talk therapy, they did pet therapy, they did music therapy, experiential therapy, somatic somatic experience therapy, just everything. They did as many variety of therapy that you can think of, and brain spotting was the #1 therapeutic tool that either released or resolved PTSD with sustainable outcomes. And so the research is showing that if a trauma capsule is completely resolved, it's over. It's not coming back. Complex trauma can take multiple brain spotting sessions. Some are released quickly, some are not. People can do brain spotting for extended periods of time, depending on the amount of trauma that they've experienced in their life. But it just, again, is a really good technique. And this is just a little bit of research reference. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. You'll get these slides, so you'll be able to go back to this. But I tell you what, Google it. Dr. Grand has some wonderful videos about brain spotting, and there are therapists that are using it as a treatment modality, and they do demonstrations of brain spotting, and they talk about brain spotting. So it's really wonderful. There's just a ton of information coming out about it. And so you can dive in and explore and really get educated about what it is and how it works. Everybody okay? I'm ticking through. I'm going to take maybe about 10 more minutes and talk a little bit more specifically about techniques, and then we'll have some question and answer time. So I know it's a lot of information. I hope I'm not moving too fast, but it's exciting. I get excited. I think I talk fast anyway, but I do get excited about this. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about brain spotting techniques. There are 9 just listed on this slide. We're only going to talk predominantly about the first 4 techniques, which you would learn in a phase 1 training. There's an outside window, an inside window, gaze spotting, which I do a lot of. As soon as I describe it to you, you'll notice that I probably have been doing it through this webinar. And then there's resource spotting, which is really wonderful because the resource spotting is sort of that grounding spot. It's the one that gives you permission to come back and feel grounded and safe. What I find really interesting about this is that I actually thought that a resource spot would be the first thing you do so that maybe it made me feel safer, but so that if a client did get into that border of their window of tolerance, that they already knew where to go to resource and come back and ground. But you actually don't start with the resource spot. You want people activated unless you have a client that has a DID or a really high activation level. Then you would start with the resource spot and then activate them as you go. So that's one technique that you're watching for, but typically somebody starts active and we want to decrease them. And so you start with an outside window and you use a pointer. You could use your finger or a pen, but you know, if their spot, and I hope I'm still on the screen, but if their spot is over here, you're not going to want to hold this that long. So you get a pointer and you put it up. Too bad, in the old days, you could have took the antenna off your car and used it for brain spotting, but no more. But what I do typically is set it on my thigh, and then I use it this way, and I say to the client, you know, let's do this at eye level. So this is how you begin to find that brain spot. But before you do that, you have the client say, what's your topic? What would you like to talk about? And they'll pick a topic, and then you say, okay, and they'll tell you a little bit about it. And as we're talking, then I'm going to say, okay, how activated do you feel? How emotionally activated do you feel about that right now? Now, that's ranging from 1 to 10, so I ask them to give me a number, and 10 is the highest. 1 is no activation. And typically, usually it's somewhere on 5 or 6, but it could be a 7, 8, depending. Sometimes people say I'm at a 2 or 3, but don't be fooled. There's a lot going on, even at a 2 or 3 level. And so we just score. They score wherever they feel activated. And then once we get the topic, once we know the activation level, then what we do is we say, okay, tell me where you feel that in your body. Because remember that we're using that central nervous system, and we really are connecting the communication between the brain and the body. So we want them to do a body scan and identify, where are you holding that? Oh, sometimes it's in the neck or the back or the shoulders or the head. Some people say in my fingers or my toes. Sometimes their jaw hurts, whatever it is. They're going to identify it for you. And once you've gone through those steps, then you start applying a technique. So you'll put your pointer up here. You'll get it eye level. I start in the middle. It doesn't matter if you go left to right, right to left, no worry. And an outside window is when the clinician is moving the pointer this way, and then you say, how do you feel over here? How do you feel over here? And you're moving it from center to left to right. You're watching for a spot, and you'll see it. They'll go like this, or they'll go like this, or they'll swallow, or you'll be able to identify the spot, because that neurological response is kicking in when you hit that spot. The eyes see it and goes boom right into the brain, and that activates. Now, an inside window, and this is called an x-axis. This is, we're just going across the visual field, left to right or right to left. Again, it doesn't matter. Then an inside window is when you start this process and you're going across and the client says, oh, uh-oh, something happened right there. I don't know, that's weird. Something just happened. I don't know what's going on. Say, okay. Then you execute the y-axis and you say, tell me, in this spot right here, does it change for you at all if we go up? Does it change for you at all if we go down? And then you do the field of vision up and down. So now you've gone across and you go up and down. So the inside window is when the client themselves identify the spot. They feel it. And they say, something's happening right here. That's where you begin. Gaze spotting is when you're working with a client or you be having a conversation and people gaze off. Like I do that a lot. I'm talking, having a conversation, and I'll go off and look at something like this, and I'm still engaged. I'm talking, but I keep going over here, and then I come back and I go over here. And so what I would do if I'm working with a client, I would say to them, you know, I notice that you keep looking to the right, or I notice that you keep looking up or down or wherever it is. I say, why don't you look there and tell me what's happening? And so you can lock in on a gaze spot and then start the brain spotting process from there, because the eyes are going there for a reason. And that's a spot. And then you just let them drift into that subcortical part of the brain, and the process begins. Again, that resource spot that's your grounding place. And I was really happy to hear that there was such a spot. That made me feel a lot better about doing the work. And then advanced techniques you'll learn in the phase 2. So the Z-axis is when you have your pointer, you get a spot, you tell the client, please look at this spot and then look beyond it as far as you can go, and then come back to it, and then go past it and come back to it. And that's called the Z-axis in convergence. It's movement going in and out, not back and forth. That typically is used as a calming technique, but it triggered me, and I had a full-on panic attack when I did that one. So the truth of the matter is that, again, there's no one way, there's no right or wrong. You just go where the client takes you. And then there's outside, inside combination. There's the rolling technique, really powerful one-eye technique. So they give you these really awesome safety goggles, and the one eye is blacked out on one set, the other eye is blacked out on the other set. And if you have time in a session, you do the left eye, then you do the right eye, both. If you don't have time, you can do one eye, but you're accessing parts of the brain based on which eye is more or less activated. So that's really a fascinating technique. I like that one a lot. And then there's an expanded resource spotting that, again, it's an advanced technique, and I won't go into those ones as much in this presentation. But, and just so you know, I'm not gaze spotting, I'm looking at the clock, so I don't use up your question and answer time. Bilateral music. If you have iTunes or you have Amazon Prime, you can go there, and Dr. Grand has bilateral music you can download. You can do brain spotting very effectively without it, but I really like it, and sometimes I do it without it, and then I add the bilateral music and just see how it increases the activity. But you'll have a client download that, they put their earbuds in, really low, you have that bilateral music going, and then you go through that whole brain spotting process, really powerful. And that's a little bit more of where you get that EMDR concept of going left, right, getting the brain communicating that way. The bilateral music will provide that. I just like listening to it too. It's cool. So iTunes, Amazon, you can download Dr. Grand's bilateral. There's also a website called bodhitreebilateral.com. Really wonderful. A brain spotting clinician created that. And I think she's in either Lafayette or Longmont. But anyway, you can go bodhitreebilateral.com. And what I like about that is there's actually music on there that's specific to the adolescent brain and then the adult brain. And so they got a little bit more technical about the bilateral music, but check that out. It's pretty cool. All right, my friends, here we go. I'm gonna wrap up. Brain spotting is being taught both nationally and internationally. I've seen two numbers, so I put 12,000 on here, but it's like between 12 and 13,000 practitioners, and that's growing all the time. If COVID hadn't hit and you love to travel, You could do a brain spotting training in Brazil. You could do it in, France, Italy. I mean, it's international. It's sweeping the world, and what a wonderful thing to have that kind of healing technique going across our world and being accessible to so many people. There is a wonderful organization. It's a nonprofit organization in Colorado called Rocky Mountain Brainspotting Institute. It's a great resource. You can go there and you can donate. If you're a brain spotting therapist, you can join. And they have a therapist directory, they have trainings, they have videos, resources. So if you want to explore more about brain spotting, that's a really great place to go, and it's local, so we want to support that. They've also set up a like a group of clinicians that are donating brain spotting sessions to people during COVID. And again, it's nonprofit, and so it's community service oriented, and just a really great way to give back to the community and help people deal with this existential trauma that the entire world is experiencing at the same time. So that's a great thing. Good news. We are having a brain spotting conference in Colorado, in Denver, actually, in 2021. It was supposed to be this year, but COVID canceled that. And so that's going to be next year. And you'll see information about that on the Rocky Mountain Brain Spotting Institute as well. So to wrap up, I will tell you that you can do phase 1 and learn those first 4 techniques. You can practice. So you can call yourself a brain spotting practitioner, but you're not certified. If you do phase 2 over here, you complete both phase 1 and phase 2. You learn all 9 of those techniques that I identified. You're practicing. You have to do both phases, 50 hours of direct clinical service, and then 6 hours of individual consultation. Then you can actually become certified in brain spotting. So that's that process. And then finally, this is super exciting and more to come, but there's master's trainings that you can take that give you specialty focuses like brain spotting with adolescents or brain spotting with addictions. And I actually just learned that Dr. Grand, again, he does a lot of sports psychology work. He does group brain spotting, which I'm all about that. I think that would be a wonderful resource. But what he does is he does individual brain spotting with each team member, and then he brings the entire team together and does brain spotting as a collective whole. So I haven't seen that yet. I'm not trained in that yet, but I will be, and I'll share it with you because I'm excited about that. To be able to do group work with this technique is amazing. The other thing that you need to know real quickly is that you can do it on telehealth. And some of the trainings now are actually being done on telehealth because of COVID, and it does not lose impact at all. So that you can do virtually. So references, again, everything that I've shared with you is not mine. I, like you, just have the privilege to be able to use what others have discovered before me. But all of this information comes from a book that Dr. David Grand created called The Revolutionary New Therapy for Rapid and Effective Change. It's a long title, it's a good book. And also from Dr. Melanie Young, who is a trainer that I've done both phase 1 and 2 with. She works out of Boulder. Boulder's high in brain spotting clinicians, and also Colorado Springs has a good number of brain spotting clinicians too, one of which is ours at our Colorado Springs location. And also our Lone Tree program director is now trained. Both of those are trained in phase 1 brain spotting. So we're doing it in Lakewood, in Lone Tree, and in Colorado Springs. And we're offering it to our Reach clients via telehealth from either one of the three of us clinicians who are trained to do it. So pretty excited about that. So that's it, everybody. I'm going to take my PowerPoint off so that I can actually maybe see some people. And we've got a lot of people. Nice. So we'll have some time for question and answer. And if I don't know the answer, I won't make it up. I'll find out what it is and get back to you.
So Dianna, I think some people had some questions in the chat. Joanne was great of answering some people's questions that they had specifically regarding brain spotting, but
Thank you,
I don't
Joanne.
know if you can scroll through and see if I'm trying to see if there were a couple that weren't
Yeah,
answered.
do you want to read them off, or do you want me to go down in and?
So the
Yeah,
first
it might be
one,
interesting, Dianna, to get your perspective as well, because you trained with someone different than me. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I answered from my perspective, but
Thanks,
you may
Joanne.
want to go back and give them some more information from your perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for doing that, by the way.
you're
I
welcome.
appreciate the tag team. Yeah, that's awesome.
so Diane
Dianna.
Sanders, oh, I'm so sorry. Diane Sanders had a quick question regarding the difference between brain mapping and brain spotting, if you knew the difference between the two.
You know what, Diane? I can't give you a really thorough response to that. Honestly, I don't know. That would have to be one that I come back to. And Joanne, I don't know if you know the difference between mapping and spotting.
I answered her a little, but my sense from mapping is it's a pretty specific thing you sit in front of a computer and do. And this is not like that. It's much more fluid. And as you were saying, and yeah, so it's very different with a very different outcome even, and very much more, this is much more individualized and customized each session to the person's needs that day.
Right. I think brain mapping, Diane, is probably a little bit more in line with like neurofeedback.
Right.
It's having a topic.
Diagnosis.
Yeah,
It's
you
the
watch
diagnosis,
it.
and the brain spotting is the therapy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I did have another question that I put in the chat, Dianna. And how effective is this with and Joanne again responded. With individuals who have personality disorders like borderline, DBT is typically the therapy of choice. And so how effective is this? Because as we do know that it's probably more borderline is really complex trauma. And so how would this be as effective with that kind of client?
Yeah, it's very effective. There's not a client that you can't do brain spotting with, really. There's not one that's been identified. Remember that this is an eclectic process, and brain spotting is a technique that you add in with other clinical techniques. Right. So it won't replace DBT. It's in addition to DBT. And truly, there are traumas. I mean, we all have trauma capsules, all of us do. And so if you go down in to that subcortical place, that's going to hit whatever trauma capsules are stored for folks. And then what will happen is that impacts mood. And, you know, if there's attachment disorder, there's abandonment issues that are in a borderline personality profile, you go into those trauma places, it's going to provide support and treatment for them. And then they can use DBT skills to be able to continue to regulate and be able to keep themselves emotionally balanced. So it's a support for it.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Yeah.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Okay, so Derek had a question, and I think you just answered it, but I will repeat the question. He says, does brain spotting typically replace talk therapy with a client, or is it used as a tool in addition to talk therapy?
It really is in addition. I genuinely don't think anything will ever replace talk therapy. Communication is important for connection. It's in addition to, and sometimes what I do is I'll do a brain spotting session, and then I usually tell them like, oh, we're gonna wrap up in about 10, 15 minutes and start, you know, move the pointer and give folks a little chance to get grounded and come back. And sometimes they wanna talk about the experience. And then the next time I see them, we don't do brain spotting. We do CBT, DBT, ACT, like we do experiential, whatever else there is. And it's actually gotten to where clients ask for it. It's like they know when they need it, and they'll come in and say, you know what, I don't want to do brain spotting. Can we just talk today? Absolutely. But sometimes they come in and say, I don't want to talk. I feel like I want to do brain spotting. Okay. So really the clients begin to identify, and we just follow what they want.
All right, I think we just have a couple more questions. And one is, how does brain spotting work with manic depression?
It works by just going into that subcortical part of the brain. I mean, it works for depression. It works for anxiety. I mean, if you think about it, it will impact anything that's driving a mood disorder, because it's a trauma that's sitting down there unresolved. And when that trauma gets tapped into and the client is feeling the depression, it goes back up into the neocortex part of the brain, and they're trying to analyze it. Like, why can't I solve this? Why can't I resolve this? And it gets into that analytical part of the brain. And when you can't solve a problem, it's depressing, right? And so any one of our mental health diagnosis, brain spotting can support. It can support, and it's a viable treatment for any mental health diagnosis.
Last question as my dogs start to wrestle next to me. What roughly is the cost for trainings and certification, Dianna, for, let's just say, like the level 1 class?
Yeah, so phase 1 is about $795, $800. Phase 2 is about $795, $800. And then the average that I have found, if you want to go for full certification, so you're about $1,600 in for the training, just phase 1 and 2. And then when you go for a full certification and you have to get those 6 consultations, I have found about $168 an hour to $170 an hour is the average consultation fee, and you need 6 of those. And that gets you certified. And then you have to do those 50 hours of direct service, and you document that. There's a form that you fill out, and you document those sessions, and that will get you into certification. If you want to do anything in addition, like those master's specialty trainings, you know, there's additional expense. But yeah, you're looking at pretty close to $2,000 to get certified.
Perfect. Anyone else have any questions before we go ahead and end this webinar? Everyone, you answered so many questions. Thank you so much, Dianna.
Good. Thank you, everybody. I'm so grateful you joined. And yeah, I think we're going to do another one. I think Joanne and I might buddy up and do another one, an extended brain spotting presentation. So stay tuned. I'm so excited to share it with you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for hopping on. All right.
Good to see you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.